The following is brought to you by the Starfleet Podcast Network, SPN The Spin. This is the Starfleet Podcast Network. I'm Big J with Beyond Trek Podcast. We've got Aaron and Megan today with Tribbles and Transporters, and Handy, Techman16, and Strange Kirk with Trek Talk. And today, unfortunately, we don't have anyone from Highly Illogical. They're 7 hours ahead of us, so maybe kind of late in the evening for them. And we're going to have to do one of these earlier at some point, just give them a better chance to be able to be in their schedule. It's tough when you're dealing with a big time zone difference like that. Well, we had the idea today to talk about our favorite Star Trek movie. And one of the things I want to do, and this idea came from Megan, talking about our favorite Star Trek movies. And what I'd like to do is to have you guys pick something. If Wrath of Khan is your favorite, that doesn't count, because I think that is an easy one. Everyone seems to make that their favorite. So let's do something different. And before we had our technical mishap, Megan, you had been telling us about your favorite. So forget everything you said, strike it from the record, and pretend like you just heard this question. So tell us about your favorite Star Trek movie.
So my favorite actually really is not Wrath of Khan. My favorite of the original series, just sticking to that 6 movies, is Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. I love the storyline of that. I love the cast and their being their last time together, because their interactions with each other are so fantastic in this movie. Being serious, and who better to hear Shakespeare in the original Klingon with Christopher Plummer. So I love that movie. It's my favorite one of the original series.
I agree with you on that. It was a very good movie. And if you get a chance, what you should do, and I'd done this before, is watch the original series movies all in order at one time. If you can, like, do a binge watch. And when you go from motion picture, Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, Voyage Home, Final Frontier, you really pick up a lot more of that tone shift that you hit when you get to the Undiscovered Country, which is, if you watch the movies kind of by themselves at different times, you don't really see that. I noticed that one time, is it just felt like, wow, this is kind of a whole different Star Trek movie of its own. It just feels like it really, really switches on you to more of a, I like the mystery, the tone, the intrigue, the similarities it had for at the time when Russia, it kind of took some of that Chernobyl meltdown, big cataclysmic incident, mixed in with, at the time, the sort of collapsing and falling apart of the USSR and bringing down the wall with East Germany. So I like what they put together there with that. So Aaron, who's the cat?
This is Ty. This is one of our show mascots. We have 2. The other is Sarah's dog, Scarlet, and Sarah couldn't be with us tonight. But yes, Ty is James Tiberius Cat. And,
I love the name.
Yep. So he actually has his collar tag that is. Well, of course, it's not showing very well, but he does have his little Star Trek Delta collar tag.
I like it.
Yeah. So he interrupts our show enough that we decided to just make him a show mascot. And as you've probably noticed, he likes to rub against my microphone and make all kinds of background noises. And so he's joined us tonight.
That's just what cats do.
It is.
So would you like to go next? Tell us about your favorite Star Trek movie and why.
Sure. Well, especially since I'm probably going to be kind of boring, because my favorite Star Trek movie, especially if we're talking just the original series ones, is also Star Trek VI. For a lot of the same reasons as Megan. I just find the story really compelling. It's probably one of the better closeouts to a series out there with, we literally have a standing ovation for the main cast in the movie. So I really enjoy the storyline, the acting, the writing, all of that. And, just to completely underscore all of what I'm saying, the cat is being obnoxious. So
I think, does the cat have an opinion on favorite Star Trek movie?
Well, I probably would say the one he's seen the most would probably be any of the Kelvin movies. I do very much enjoy all three of the Kelvin movies. And I probably have a very unusual opinion that I very much enjoyed Beyond as one of my favorite movies out there. So if we're talking outside of the main 6 original series movies, that would be one of my favorites out there.
Well, Next Gen counts. The Next Gen movies can be among the ones considered as a favorite. But you like Undiscovered Country as well. Okay, wow. So that's 2 for Undiscovered Country.
And I don't know if you noticed, but part of my background setup here is I do have the VHS movies of the original series and the Next Generation movies. And speaking of Wrath of Khan, you've kind of vetoed it, but I don't know if you noticed that big white line in the middle of my set. That is very annoying because
mildly infuriating.
When I bought the boxed set, back when they were still putting out box sets of VHS, it shipped with the special edition cover of Wrath of Khan, which is cool and all. It has stills from the movie on the front of it and everything. But the box set was designed so that when you line them all up together, it makes a picture of the Enterprise. Only, I have a nice big white line halfway through the Enterprise.
Yeah, I see that. That would really make me angry. That sucks right there. Like it's ruined the whole thing. Ruined it because I've seen the original box set where they didn't do that crap. Why would you do that? Who is in the packaging department that just decided, screw it, we'll just put it all together even though it messes up the entire motif?
I'm like, either if you want to do the special edition cover, make it a secondary cover. Like put it outside of the normal cover so it has 2, or have it be one that you had to buy separately to get the special cover. But, hey, maybe it's one of those things where, it's
but what do we know, right?
Set. Yeah, exactly. Maybe it'll be one of these things that down the road, people will be like, oh, man, you've got the one with the missing cover. Oh, man, that's awesome. Who knows?
That's the collector's edition.
Yeah.
Techman 16, if you could take a break from the bowling, you want to go next? He's spending his Sunday throwing balls down an alley.
That's right. That's right. I love throwing my balls. Heavy balls, light balls, all sorts of balls. I think my favorite movie outside of Wrath of Khan probably is Generations.
Okay. Interesting choice.
It was probably the first ever Star Trek movie that I watched either on TV or in the theater. No, on TV. So it was probably the first Trek movie that I saw on TV. And I really like Malcolm McDowell. And so he portrayed a very convincing villain. The storyline is utter garbage, but I don't know. There's just something about it. The whole Kirk Picard thing and their dynamic. I don't know. I like that one.
Hey, just let you know, I'm not sure, but if there's any way around that. But you're cutting in and out a little bit. We missed some of what you said there, but it sounded like what I could pick up was you weren't a big fan of the storyline, but you liked Malcolm McDowell playing the villain. Is that right?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Is this better?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, I think so. You tell everyone in bowling alley to shut the hell up. We're doing this live.
Yeah, we're doing it live. We're always doing it live. I enjoyed Malcolm McDowell. I enjoy him as an actor, and so he made a very convincing villain for the movie. And the Kirk and Picard dynamic was probably the coolest thing in Star Trek that I've seen to date, I guess.
Okay.
You have such two iconic captains, and they don't. Most of the captains never interacted really with one another after they've gotten all this hype. You had Cisco and you had Picard, but Cisco wasn't anybody in Emissary. So you never had that kind of repertoire, if you will, prior.
Right. Yeah, I can get behind that one. All right, Strange Kirk, how about you? You're next. Let's hear your favorite Star Trek movie.
Star Trek 4, Boys Home.
Also a good one.
And why do you like that one so much?
For a multitude of reasons. Obviously, it's really funny seeing them sort of, mix at the time, the world, the real world with the fictional universe that we enjoy. I mean, that's always fun, right? To see whenever they try to mix a real life with whatever fan universe that you're a part of. So that's fun. It was also much like the reason why I like Star Trek. It was also one of the I'm pretty sure it was the first, if not one of the first, movies that I'd ever watched with my grandfather. So it was sort of a special place in my heart, so to speak. And it's just a fun movie. I mean, it's nice. How do I put it? It's sort of a nice break between the galactic dangers and all these different things. Like, it's just, we're trying to pick up two whales and bring them forward in time. And it's kind of silly, right? But it's also sort of a break from what you're used to. So it was something that was different, and it paid off, because obviously I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the second most successful one next to the Wrath of Khan. So obviously it paid off. I think that the box office was like 26 million, and they brought in, or the budget was 26, and they brought in 133 or something. I can't remember, but so yeah. So that's my favorite.
And I think it was one that you could get a broader audience involved in. So if you maybe weren't necessarily a Star Trek fan, or you weren't as much into it as, say, others, it was a movie you could bring your friends to, your family. You could get your mom or dad to watch it, siblings, whatever it is, a friend of yours that may only know a little bit about Star Trek, because you're right. It is a movie about needing to get two whales that are on the endangered species list and take them into the future to communicate with a big cigar-looking thingy that came from who knows where. And I like that there wasn't, they didn't try to do, what's that?
It's a space dildo.
Just a reminder, this is not a children's show. So, and I like how they didn't get into really where this thing came from, what it was about. It was just, here's the point. It came from somewhere. It's trying to communicate with this frequency that humpback whales can do. That's it. And it's messing up a bunch of shit when it's trying to do that. That's the story. It doesn't get into a whole lot of science fiction-y kind of stuff, which I liked about that.
When you think about it, it's like it's almost like when if you've never watched the movie and I gave you the premise, right? And you, in your mind, you're like, that can't work. That shouldn't work, right? It shouldn't work out. And it should not have worked out as well as it did,
right,
based on exactly what you're saying. Like, wait a minute, there's just this vague cigar phallus floating through the freaking space, and and we're just supposed to be okay with it. Yes, you are. No, man, that's not acceptable. You gotta give us more information. No, because we don't even have any more information. We just kind of came up with this shit, and it worked. So
sometimes less is more. The less you say, the better. Some things are best left to the imagination. We've seen that in a bunch of different sort of fandoms, anime, video games, where you've got developers and creators going, yeah, we just, whatever you think, man, open to interpretation. And it's fun. So there you go. All right.
I also think it would.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
I just want to say, I also think it would not have worked if it was not a Star Trek movie. If this was a movie about random people in the future encounter this thing that comes and is depleting Earth of energy and melting the oceans or melting the ice and all of that kind of stuff, and they need to go back in time to get whales, but we don't have the background context of it's Kirk and his crew. I don't know that story would have taken off like it did.
I don't think so. I mean, you're talking about the show where there's a big fucking green gloved space hand that comes out and grabs a spaceship and throws it through space. You know what I mean? Like, it's already ridiculous. Like, Jesus, how many more shenanigans can we get involved in? Jesus.
Has anybody ever watched A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yes.
Because that's equally as ridiculous.
Yes. Yeah, classic.
The rats and the dolphins just left Earth as they could.
Yep.
Yeah, so long and thanks for all the fish,
Yep.
That's a good comparison there. And I like that. All right, let's hear from you, Handy. What's your favorite one and why?
Well, first off, question for you. Are there any rules about what movie you can pick or anything's fair game?
Just Star Trek movie. Favorite Star Trek movie, any of them?
Well, seeing as how... Well, actually, I'd pick a new movie. Really old recording have never been my thing. So I'm going to pick Star Trek Beyond.
Excellent. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that one. I think that's one of the ones that's kind of didn't get the kind of credit it deserved, because I felt like Star Trek Beyond sort of went back to the whole teamwork kind of thing with Star Trek, the crew, each one having a part to play in solving an issue. Well, why don't you tell us why you like that one the most?
It's really simple for me. It had me captured. I enjoy the heck out of it. And really, I like the new spin on old characters. It's just as simple as that. There's nothing in depth there about it aside from I just enjoyed it.
Yeah, I can get behind that. So let's see. I guess that leaves it to me. My favorite. I honestly want to say that if there's any Star Trek movie I would sit and decide to play and watch at any given time, it would probably also be The Undiscovered Country. And because I really, like I said before, I like the whole story behind it. I thought that the plot tried to sabotage the whole trying to get the Klingons and the Federation trying to reach some kind of ceasefire, armistice, some kind of peace, and how you have people, the old war, I don't want to say warmongers, but the ones that did not want to accept that things would change like that. They wanted to keep the adversarial nature going. So wanted to talk a little more. So that's my favorite. And Aaron and Megan, you've already went into why you like Star Trek 6. And I think that's, you've said what seems to be the reason why on that. But another Star Trek movie I want to talk about, and this one is actually, I think it's my least favorite. Well, I think Final Frontier is my least favorite, but this is the second one.
Oh, yeah.
And this is why I want to talk about Star Trek Nemesis, because there was this thing in the, like I go on, in msnbc.com is my open new tab, front page thing, whatever. And there's usually lots of different news stories, sometimes about Star Trek. Well, they talked about the dune buggy in this one. And that reminded me of just how ridiculous, how stupid was that whole idea. Like who wakes up one day and decides, oh, let's just have a whole dune buggy scene and drive around and screw the Prime Directive. We're going to have a shootout with this pre-warp civilization. And to me, it was out of the blue. It didn't, I don't, as you can tell, I'm getting kind of worked up about it, but am I the only one that thinks of all the ridiculous things you could do in Star Trek, why was this one of them? Does anyone else feel that way, or is that just me?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Anytime they break away from core beliefs of the Federation and throw it into any show or movie, it's absolutely ridiculous. And it feels just like lazy writing. And as time goes on, the further into our own future we get, the more they do that, just pander to, I guess, younger generations, like the car chases and the, you know what I mean? Just, it's not very Trek, a lot of it.
Well, you gotta hold somebody's attention, right? People's attention spans now. You got like 3 to 7 seconds or something to grab their attention before they keep scrolling. So it's got to be something flashy, some explosion. As tech likes to point out, lens flares. It's not exactly a team of rocket doctors watching this stuff these days. I mean, the attention span of the current generation, that's who they're trying to appeal to, is smaller than a common housefly. And they just, they just move from one thing to another. And you can see that evolution throughout Star Trek. I mean, they would have some action scenes and stuff like that in the original series, but especially as you got into the next generation, it's pretty like cerebral experience, right? Like you really had to think about certain things. You're actually getting involved in the conversation. You were discussing things, and there was a lot more talking and, negotiations and sharing of ideals and things like that. And then as you got closer and get closer and closer now, there's more action, there's more fighting, there's more, drama, and there's, all those things. So unfortunately, that's just the way we're going. So we can either try to figure out which aspects of that works for us, or we can sit around like a bunch of old fucks complaining about it,
Yes. Yeah, you're right. And I think no one gets aggravated more about Star Trek than Star Trek fans. Kind of like the saying you hear, nobody hates Star Trek more than Star Trek fans.
Oh yeah, I mean it's true. I mean, you run into people all the time. Like, oh my God, I love Discovery. It's the greatest ever. What other Star Trek have you watched? I watched a couple episodes of The Next Generation with my dad when I was younger. That's pretty much it, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's it. They're used to, and you're right about the way that the new stuff is done. They do have to do more of grabbing that attention fast, and so you get more of that flashy, action-based, lens flare to jump out into your eyes, and kind of that to pull it in. And do you wonder? Do you ever think, are they trying to copy Star Wars? Maybe not so much copy, but Star Trek is trying to make some kind of closer intersection with Star Wars.
You look at what Star Wars has done in the past, 10, 15 years. They've been able to capture children. And so the business model that they've been using, it works, right? Case in point, go to any toy store and what are you going to find?
Star Wars. On
every shelf. Star Wars. You're going to find Star Wars lightsabers, blasters, Legos, books, clothes, toothbrush, toothpaste, everything, right? what are you going to find at Star Trek? You'll find it in like the aisle with like Bengay and aspirin. You know what I mean? Like there's if they have any at all. And so what they're trying to do, they're like, man, they're super successful. We're going to start creating all these other crazy spinoffs. But the problem is that the show never had it to begin with. It was never appealing to kids to begin with, right? It's not appealing to younger people. It was always a very adult kind of show. And so when you're trying to appeal to that, there's no cool space wizards and light swords and, all that type of stuff. No, it's just basically a bunch of people, middle-aged people sitting around talking about how to solve a problem. It's not interesting, right? It's not interesting to children.
I never thought of it that way. I think you're right.
And part of the thing is, too, the fact that Star Wars is now a part of Disney, and Disney knows how to market out the wazoo and get all these promotional items and toys and all those sorts of things. And they know how to catch the attention of lots of different age ranges, whereas Paramount is very stringent on a lot of those sorts of things. It's hard to find a lot of Star Trek toys and that sort of thing. I mean, it wasn't back when TNG and DS9 and all that kind of stuff were airing. I mean, I have all kinds of action figures and, sitting behind me, I've got a DS9 model and a phaser and all this kind of stuff. I have a poster from Voyager that I bought. I think it was, we didn't have a Walmart back then, but it was just in the poster rack at the department store, So that kind of stuff did happen somewhat with Star Trek, but it hasn't gotten to the same level that Star Wars is now. And there's definitely a feeling of Star Trek is chasing Star Wars. And I seem to remember I watched some of the behind the scenes and making of on the Kelvin universe movies. And there was actually a conversation. I want to say it was J.J. Abrams actually, ran into George Lucas and was like, literally asked him, how do I make Star Trek as big as Star Wars? How do I do it? And of course, George Lucas's offhand answer was add lightsabers. But
piss off, leave me alone.
Yeah. But there was that kind of stuff. It definitely was a specific thought of how do we amp up Star Trek to catch the 3 to 7 second attention span folks? How do we put action and stuff into Star Trek? And as someone who is a big action movie fan, I think that's probably why one of the reasons I enjoy the Kelvin movies is because I can have a little of column A and a little of column B. And being someone who grew up with original Trek, in the 80s and 90s, I already had that fondness. I had the desire for Star Trek to be back. And then when it got melded with my other likes in media, action, and I will say that there's plenty of emotion and all that kind of stuff in those movies as well. Maybe not as much as the actual series, but I enjoyed it.
I think that, and it's not so much the Star Wars merchandise that you see everywhere. It's just a lack of Star Trek. Because when you go to these places, you can go to any store, Walmart, Target, whatever it is, Meijer, Kroger, whatever you have in your respective areas, and you will see merchandising for all kinds of things. You've got Star Wars. Batman, Superman, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, Power Rangers, all of it, everything. Star Trek is always kind of mysteriously missing. So that's kind of how I look at it. It's kind of like not guilty doesn't mean innocent. It's not.
They tried that when they came out with the Kelvin movies, and I remember it when they came out in 2009 when they started. The preview. I remember first watching the preview. It was my stepdad and I back in the day. I was over at his house visiting, and it came on TV. We were watching some show, I can't remember, and it came on TV. We were like, oh man, this is awesome. And then soon after, they put out action figures. They put out this stuff. Nobody bought them.
Right.
Nobody bought them.
They had the phaser.
And again, still no one bought them. The shit was on sale, a few months later in the clearance aisle because nobody bought it. And so it's not, again, the Star Trek franchise is not something that lends itself to marketing towards children, which is who's going to buy a lot of this stuff. Mom, I want the action figure. I want this. I want that. I want this. I want that. They came out with stuff back in the day, but the audience and the consumer base is so much smaller than Star Wars. And it will always be that way. And there's not going to be anything they can do to catch up to it. It's just not that way. They tried with the Nickelodeon, they tried the Prodigy and everything. No one I know who has a kid who had their kid watch it. None of those kids cared. They didn't like it.
Really?
And they didn't hate it, but they weren't into it. They were like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, I guess. Can I watch SpongeBob, or whatever it is, they're watching. I don't know if I could watch these things, but so it's just, they tried, and I think they just need to just be okay with what they have. You have this IP that is really for adults. I mean, maybe you might get the later teens in on it, but for the most part, the younglings don't really care, and they never will, and that's okay. They're not supposed to. But I think maybe instead of trying to focus so much on getting more young people into it, maybe focus on just, developing a quality product and, just have something that anybody can enjoy instead of trying to get so, like you say, you're chasing the heels of Star Wars. You're never going to catch that. Never.
I think you're right. That's a good point. I really think that at this point, when it comes to Star Trek and merchandising or the lack thereof, it seems like it's just going to be written in stone that it's not going to work. That Star Trek just does not lend itself to the toy buying audience.
Right. I mean, there's plenty of other things that we, I have plenty of Star Trek stuff. I got little Star Trek collectible cards and figures and this and that, obviously, but those things are not marketed to children, right? Those are clearly, collectibles that are marketed to adults and things like that. So, I mean, obviously you'll have great success there, but yeah, like, little micro machine Hot Wheel action figure kind of thing. Just give it up, man. It's not happening. You've tried to make it happen several generations and it's just not going to take hold. Good luck.
Anyone else got any opinions or chime-ins on the merchandising problem with the Star Trek franchise? I actually collected some of the stuff in the 90s, in the heyday of... They really hit it then.
Here's the thing, though, with Star Trek is it's an older crowd. The fans are an older crowd, typically. Mm-hmm. And they may be trying to change that with some of the, pop and snap and lens flares and whatnot. I don't know. Maybe sometime in the future that can change, but we're going to lose part of what drew us to Star Trek over something like Star Wars in the first place. So I see it as two kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. Just, it's not the kind of genre, in my opinion, not the kind of show, I guess, not the kind of following that, we're going to see a lot of merchandising from. I know there's a lot of hardcore fans that, I mean, if there was a Lego Enterprise, I'd probably buy it and build it. But I don't know that there is. If there is, I haven't seen it.
There was no. Wow, you're right. I don't believe I've ever seen. The closest I've ever seen to a Lego Enterprise was for Star Trek for 2009. There was an Enterprise playset, but it wasn't Lego. It was oh God, what is it? Was that
brand out there that's releasing? There's another brand out there that's releasing Star Trek stuff in Lego
Mega
type
Block.
sets.
Mega Blocks? I think
Mega Block has, Mega Blocks has that contract. So,
well, I seen as how I've never even heard of Mega Block. I can only assume Disney just kind of marketed the corner on that stuff. I really don't know, but. Clearly the powers that be, I mean, with Star Trek properties, they've changed hands so many times. It's no wonder that merchandising hasn't been refined. Whereas, Star Wars has changed hands, from LucasArts to Disney, and that's it. And I don't even know how many times Star Trek's changed hands or had different hands in the pot and different merchandising deals. I can only imagine it's an absolute mess.
Yeah.
So who knows? Who knows why at the end of it.
For a company, you also have to remember, man, for a company, it's got to make sense to the company that's going to manufacture. Let's say I'm a big toy manufacturer and you come to me and you say, I got this, this intellectual property here. I want to make these toys. I want to market them towards, age range 5 to 9. And I'm going to look at it and I'm going to go, fucking 5 to 9 year olds getting Star Trek stuff, dude. No thanks. I got to be able to make money off of it. I'm not, I got to be able to sell it, right? So it's got to make sense.
Which is why No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's just, it is what it is. Like I said, we've seen it tried. That's why, like I say, you see, everybody knows Star Trek, right? Like the people out in the middle of, jungles in certain places have probably heard of Star Trek. It's a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Not like Star Wars, but it's still a very popular. I mean, people, Star Trek is pretty world renowned, right? So it's not that people don't know what it is, right? It's you're looking at the market. So that's where you're coming from. That's where they're coming from, is that you look at any of the stuff that you have. The vast majority of the toys that I've seen, and I'm going to say toys, not necessarily like collectibles, like, a figurine that you would put on your mantle or you would put in your game room or, something like that on the shelf. An actual toy that's meant to be played with. You look on the back of them, and oftentimes it's some like off the wall, obscure toy manufacturer you've never heard of. It's like you're picking it up and you're like, oh, Hasbro,
Yeah.
No, it's like Dim One Toy Enterprises, or something like that. It's just some obscure manufacturer no one's ever heard of. Worf's face looked like somebody drew him in the dark after they woke up hungover. It's, a lot of that stuff is just not great, man.
So, and I mean, that does depend on whether you're talking about the stuff that came out in the 80s and 90s or the stuff that's coming out today. I mean, stuff coming out today, yeah, sure. But I mean, I just reached back and picked up my phaser from TNG, and it was brought out by Playmates.
Yep.
So like back then, it was
Playmates was killing it,
bringing these out. Yeah.
But you're right. Now, any manufacturer that would even want to have anything to do with Star Trek, it's just like, it's something obscure you've never heard of.
Look at a lot of this stuff. I mean, they're still selling Star Wars toys that the particular, whatever the toy is based off of, the spacecraft or whatever, hasn't been shown in a modern movie in like 20 something years, and they're still selling them every day.
Yep.
Right. If they sold that well and they continued to sell that well, they'd still be selling. This is my point, right? This is America. If something has a market, somebody's going to sell it, right? Like,
yes.
Some greedy bastard is going to figure out how to get that shit out on the market. You know what I mean?
The distribution model
one way or the other.
What was that, Tech?
the distribution models are also very different, right? For Star Wars, it's mainly come to Disneyland, Disney World, and see all these rides and buy the things that the rides are made out of. Buy the Falcon, buy Stormtrooper, buy the lightsabers. Whereas Star Trek is more like, let's build a whole bunch of shows and get ad revenue from streaming services from it.
So their money making is with the streaming service and subscription and maybe the comics, but not toy marketing. That's cornered by everyone
And
else.
games. I mean, there's a lot of adult Star Trek, so games appeal to them.
Forgot about the games, yeah. So, Megan, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, on the whole. Did you collect anything? Do you think that, well, that makes sense that Star Trek is geared towards me and our age group and not our children?
I for sure was a big collector of items back in the day. I had got the Hamilton mint plates, and I have, oh gosh, probably every Hallmark ornament that was made up until the last 8 years. I just haven't gotten them every year. So I have the 12-inch dolls that came out at the movies when First Contact was being released. I bought all of those, but it was all readily available. I could go to Walmart or Target and buy all of that. And so I love the novels and the movie posters. So all of that, but I also I'm curious, between all of us, how did y'all get introduced to Star Trek? Because for me, I'm in the early 40s. And so I grew up, it was just something that we watched in the house. My dad watched the original series. He was a huge sci-fi fan. And I literally grew up watching that in syndication. And then when Next Generation came out, watching that growing up. And I, as a child, fell in love with Star Trek in this universe. So I'm more and for me, some of the newer stuff is a little bit hit or miss, but how did y'all find Star Trek? Is everyone like me? It's just something that you grew up watching. I feel
that's most. Jay, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and jump in here. I'm gonna have to hop off here in a minute. Anyway, my phone's dying. I've got some company coming over, but
sure.
I feel like you're gonna find the hardcore Star Trek fans, and I would consider all of us. I mean, we're sitting on it's a Sunday afternoon, and we're sitting on a podcast talking about Star Trek, right? I would say we're pretty committed. So I think you're going to find most hardcore Trek fans. That's how it happened. There's an emotional link, whether that be for me, it was my grandfather, right? So my grandfather, he grew up. He came up, as I say, grew up, right? No, he's old as hell. God rest his soul. He, when Star Trek came out, he was in his, he would have been in his late 30s, around 40, somewhere around there when it came out, right? And so it's very interesting, for him to watch it and stuff like that. When it came out, my mother was a very young girl. So it was a very big deal. It was a different type of show, and so it was a very big deal. And so it became a big part of something that he liked to watch that. And he also, because of him, I also listened to old radio shows and have the discs and some tapes of them. But I digress. The common link you'll find is that emotional factor for all the hardcore fans, right? The sometimers, the people who stumbled across TNG on TV and were like, oh, this is kind of cool. Those types of people, the sometimers that, they know about Star Trek, but they're not really super into it. Those people generally don't have that kind of emotional link. And I think you'll find that that's true pretty much across the board. So I think most of us probably have something like that.
For me, it was when I was 5. This was when Wrath of Khan would come on HBO a lot. And it was just one of those sort of out of the blue that I was drawn to the movie. And I would watch it every time it was on. And it was just, that was my very first exposure and viewing of Star Trek. And I think that I'm not sure if it wasn't flashy, and I didn't understand, well, I didn't know about the whole, this story is like a sequel. This movie is a sequel from the original series episode Space Seed. Didn't know any of that. But the action, the story, the big battles at the time was just something that I was drawn to, and I just liked it. You know how it is. There are things that you watch and you see and you just like it. You may not know why, you just do. And so at that point, I wanted to get into and see everything Star Trek. The first movie, because of course I missed motion picture. Get that. Star Trek 3. This was way back in the day, if you guys remember this, where there's that little red button on the remote control, the thing that was like a box that had a cord that was attached to the cable box, and you hit the red authorize button. It's like the red button, don't press this without your parents' permission. And that was the first movie I ever rented or bought on the television. And back then, at that time, before Next Gen, the thing I remember was the big merchandising part of it, were the comic books. And there were comic books, models. The models were big. And there were some games, but, so and there were some some figurines. And now, like we've said, it was never quite as big as Star Wars, but it was something. And
it was pretty big though in the 90s. You could.
Oh yeah, 90s.
In the 90s, it sort of went toe to toe with Star Wars for a little bit, because I can remember, because I loved reading the novels. So one, you could find novels, it had its own section in your bookstore, and then next to that was Star Wars, and sometimes the Star Trek section was bigger than the Star Wars one. So I'm not saying it was never in competition or never quite there. It really was there in the 90s, but I think part of what happened was an oversaturation in the market.
Yes.
That for sure hit me. By the time Enterprise came out, I watched the first 2 seasons, and life was busy. I was done. I didn't have time to devote for this show that I just was I didn't have time to read. I was spending my money on other things. I really do think a lot of it was oversaturation in the market, which may be why Paramount is a little leery of putting too much stuff, even in its money. It's all about money too. So I think it's just where in the 90s where we were, as consumers, were buying everything and then just sort of trickled out on doing that. So I think that may be a big thing too, of I got to where I just couldn't and keep up with it anymore.
I hope you finished Enterprise though at some point.
Actually, I haven't, which is what's so funny about what we do with our podcast. Are we watching these completed shows? So we'll eventually get there. You have missed the best of Trek. And I mean all Trek. Seasons 3 and 4 of Enterprise are so much better than anything that Trek has ever made, bar none.
Really? That's an interesting take. Okay.
Oh, if I had to pick out of any show, any season, whatever, Enterprise season 4, I'll pick over anything. Anything Trek related.
That's crazy. I don't think I've ever heard anyone anywhere say that.
I haven't either.
Why? Okay, so why is it that that's in such high regard for you?
Well, so there. Let's put it this way. I read an article about how Kurtzman and his gang of whatevers basically used canon as a guideline for new Trek. Not rules, but loose guidelines. Star Trek Enterprise season 4 had amazing story arcs that lasted 2 to 3 episodes, with the exception of the finale, because I'm going to erase that part from my mind. But it tied our present universe, to Star Trek, to all the things that happened in the original series and beyond, with real attention to detail. And all the, xenophobic, whatever, the xenophobic tendencies of the villains in Picard and Discovery was done so much better in 2 episodes of Terra Prime and Star Trek Enterprise. So plus you had the conversion from the augments to the Klingons, from the forehead ridges to without the forehead ridges. There was the explanation of that. There was the explanation of how Section 31 kind of started, more or less. There was the rediscovery of the teachings of Surak on Vulcan, and the role Jonathan Archer played in that. Kind of reunification. What is it? The Romulan, almost Romulan takeover of Vulcan. There's just so much, and it was so well written and so compact. It's just such a pleasure to watch.
Okay, all right. I will say that.
I have heard some of that as an opinion. I had a coworker actually loaned me where he had taped some episodes of Enterprise, and he really wanted me to watch it because it was the episodes explaining the change from the Klingons we see in the original series to what we saw in TNG. And I never ended up watching it because I just had other things I was interested in and all of that. But I have heard that Enterprise basically went back and just went through all the things that we kind of just accepted as the background of TNG onward and linked it to original series and what came through with that, and made it all line up so that there weren't those questions and the kind of just assuming, oh, well, they just decided to change it because they had a bigger budget and better effects.
Also, it explained why the 4 founding members of the Federation were the founding members of the Federation.
Yeah.
Like, it went into detail because the Romulans tried to destabilize the Alpha Quadrant in order to take it over, and Enterprise helped ban the Andorians and the Vulcans, who are at each other's throats. It helped mend the relationship between the Tellarites and the Andorians in a way that has never been coordinated before, which would lead to the foundation of the Federation. I mean, it's just so well written.
How salty would you be as the Romulans to realize that you're the ones that caused the formation of the Federation? Stupid!
Yeah, they didn't like it very much, I'm sure.
You big dummies. Handy, would you like to wrap us up on what got you started in Star Trek?
Really it just started with TNG for me. I just remember watching it since I was a little kid. I was born in 81. And I just kind of grew up watching it. I never got into Star Trek, the original series or the original movies. And I've since gone back and watched most of them. A few I'm missing, but I can't remember because it was so many years ago. So really, it's just TNG on that has as a Star Trek fan. So I'm a little different than probably most Star Trek fans and everybody. Not everybody's the same type of fan, I guess. But at any rate, that's what drew me in. Just the sci-fi of it. I'm just a huge sci-fi fan, and anything that really piques the imagination draws me in, as long as it's done well.
I have a question for all of you. How does it feel to know that Star Trek Nemesis is probably the most relevant movie going into New Trek?
How so?
How so? Yeah.
So actually, it's two movies. It's First Contact and Nemesis, because of the whole, it's the expansion of that storyline of the Borg and the Romulans and all the shenanigans they have after the supposed peace talks that happened after Shinzon was killed.
Okay. All right. I think I can see where you're going there. Yeah.
Right. I mean, Nemesis is all about the Romulans, right? They established a new colony, or not a new colony, but a new canonical planet, Remus, which is the sister planet to Romulus, where the Remans were basically subservient. Shinzon, who's got Picard's DNA, rises to the level of Praetor. Then they discuss all these various things, but obviously there's nefarious things going on. And, the whole point of this was, the Borg have been defeated because the Queen is supposedly dead, but not really, because there's so many of them. So the next baddie is the Romulans, but then they supposedly defeated Shinzon and so forth, so they could stabilize relationship with the Romulan Empire. And then going into New Trek, it's all about Picard screwed us because our sun went supernova, so we're going to go back in time and kill Kirk. But that didn't work out, so we're gonna use the Borg tech that we discovered to make super, synths and whatnot, and try to kill people that way because our planet blew up and we blame Picard for it.
I see where you're going with that.
He's got kind of a point. I have to take off, guys. I'm sorry. I got it. But
no, that's okay. I think we'll go ahead and wrap up here so that you guys can enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Well, Aaron, Megan, Handy, Techman16, and Strange Kirk, who was here, thank you guys so much for taking some time out to sit here and talk about Star Trek, our favorite thing to talk about, I guess, And so for all of you listening or watching, thank you again, and live long and prosper.